My name is Marlene. I'm 32 years old. And I'm sitting at the most expensive restaurant in the city, watching my parents smile at my sister's boyfriend like he's the second coming while they pretend I don't exist. Ryan just asked me what I do for work, and before I can even open my mouth, my mother leans forward with desperation in her eyes and hisses those three words that have defined my entire life. Don't embarrass us. My father shoots me a warning glare across the table. My sister Bethany smirks into her champagne glass, already savoring whatever humiliation she thinks is coming. I feel my phone buzz in my pocket, but I ignore it. The question hangs in the air like a blade about to drop, and for the first time in my life, I'm about to answer honestly. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from right now. Drop your city or country in the comments because this story is about to take you on a journey you won't believe. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or been the black sheep who never measured up, hit that like button because you're going to relate to every word of this. And please subscribe, because what unfolds at this dinner table will leave you speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family was a finite resource, and Bethany had claimed all of it before I even understood what I was missing. She was 5 when I was born, already the star of every room she entered, already the child my parents pointed to with pride. I have this memory from when I was 7 years old, sitting in the audience at Bethany's dance recital, watching my mother record every single second on the camcorder, while my father beamed from the front row. That same year, I won the school spelling bee, and when I came home with the certificate, my mother glanced at it and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to help Bethany practice for her next pageant. The certificate ended up in a drawer somewhere. Bethany's dance trophies lined an entire wall of the living room. The differences became more pronounced as we got older, carved deeper into my sense of self with every passing year. Bethany got piano lessons, horseback riding, private tutoring in French. I got hand-me-down textbooks and the expectation that I'd figure things out on my own. When Bethany turned 13, my parents threw her a party at the country club with 200 guests and a live band. When I turned 13, we had cake at home because it was a Tuesday and nobody had time for more. I learned not to ask for things, not to expect celebration, not to take up space. By the time I was 15, I had a part-time job at a grocery store, not because I wanted spending money, but because I needed to buy my own school supplies and clothes. My parents paid for everything Bethany needed, and most of what she wanted. For me, they said it built character to work for what I had. High school graduation day crystallized everything wrong with my family into one perfect, painful moment. I was valedictorian, first in my class, headed to college on partial scholarship that I'd earned through countless hours of studying, while working 20 hours a week. My parents sat in the audience, but I could see them checking their watches, whispering to each other. Halfway through the ceremony, right before they called my name to give my speech, they stood up and left. Bethany had a dance recital across town, some regional competition that my parents decided was more important than watching their youngest daughter graduate at the top of her class. I gave my speech to a crowd that didn't include my family, and when I came home that night, my mother said, "How was it?" without looking up from addressing invitations to Bethany's graduation party the following week. They threw her a massive celebration even though she'd barely scraped by with C's and D's. I got a card with $50 in it, and a note that said, "Congratulations on your accomplishment." College was when I finally understood that the inequality wasn't accidental or temporary. It was structural, built into the foundation of who we were as a family. My parents paid every penny of Bethany's tuition to State University, covered her apartment, gave her a generous monthly allowance for food and entertainment. She joined a sorority, went to parties, treated college like a 4-year vacation. I got community college and student loans because my father sat me down and explained that they'd already invested so much in Bethany's education, and besides, I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. I wasn't scholarship material for a university, he said, even though my grades were nearly perfect. What he meant was they didn't want to pay. So I worked full-time at a diner, took classes at night, and graduated with a 2-year degree and $30,000 in debt, while living in a studio apartment that had mold in the bathroom and heat that only worked half the time. The car situation was almost funny in how perfectly it illustrated everything. Bethany got a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday, presented with a bow in the driveway while the whole family cheered. I took the bus until I was 23, saving every spare dollar until I could buy a 15-year-old Toyota that broke down constantly. When I finally drove it to a family dinner, My father looked at it and said, "Well, at least you're mobile now." And my mother added, "Bethany's getting a new car next month. Something more suitable for her career." They never asked how Eid managed to save the money, or acknowledged the years Eid spent on public transportation in all weather. Bethany's new car, by the way, was a luxury sedan they bought outright because her marketing job required her to look successful. Family gatherings became exhibitions of Bethany's greatness. Carefully choreographed performances, where I was expected to applaud from the shadows. Thanksgiving meant listening to endless stories about Bethany's promotion, her new apartment, her vacation to Europe. Christmas meant watching Bethany open gift after gift while I got one or two token items, usually practical things, like socks or dish towels. My parents would toast to Bethany's success, to her bright future, to how proud they were of everything she'd accomplished. If anyone asked about me, my mother would smile tightly and say, "Marlene is doing her own thing," which was code for we'd rather not talk about it. I learned to arrive late and leave early, to bring a bottle of wine as my contribution, and expect nothing in return, to protect myself by caring less. The comparisons were constant, casual, crushing. Why couldn't I be more ambitious like Bethany? Why didn't I have a career plan like Bethany? Why couldn't I dress nicer, date better men, have more impressive friends? Every conversation with my parents eventually circled back to ways I disappointed them, or ways Bethany exceeded expectations. I stopped calling home unless absolutely necessary. I stopped sharing news about my life because the response was always lukewarm at best, dismissive at worst. When I got my acceptance letter to graduate school, something I'd worked toward for years, I didn't even tell them. I knew they'd find a way to diminish it, or redirect the conversation to whatever Bethany was doing. I built walls around the parts of myself that mattered, keeping my real life separate from the family that couldn't see me clearly anyway. 6 months ago, Bethany called me for the first time in nearly a year. We weren't close, hadn't been since childhood, existed in each other's lives, mainly through obligatory holiday appearances, and the occasional text message acknowledging a birthday. So when her name lit up my phone, I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up to hear her voice bubbling with excitement about meeting someone new. "His name was Ryan Caldwell," she said, "and he was absolutely perfect. He came from old money, worked in finance though she was vague about the specifics, drove an Aston Martin, and had taken her to Martha's Vineyard for their third date." I made appropriate congratulatory noises while wondering why she was telling me this, what she wanted from me. The answer came at the end of the call when she said casually, "Mother and father are dying to meet him. We're planning a dinner. You should probably come." Not an invitation, an instruction, a warning. The next few months became a referendum on Ryan Caldwell's existence in our family. My mother started every phone call by mentioning him, dropping his name into conversations like a talisman of Bethany's success. "Ryan thinks Bethany should apply for that director position. Ryan took Bethany to the symphony. Ryan's family has a house in the Hamptons." My father, who rarely showed emotion about anything, started referring to Ryan as my future son-in-law, even though there'd been no proposal, no ring, no official commitment. They were already planning the wedding in their minds, already envisioning the wealthy grandchildren, already calculating the social capital they'd gain from having Ryan Caldwell connected to the family. Bethany herself became even more insufferable, posting constant photos on social media of expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, designer gifts. Every image screamed, "Look at my perfect life," to an audience that included me, though I rarely looked. I wasn't invited to meet Ryan during those first months. Family dinners happened without me, strategic gatherings where my parents could showcase Bethany and themselves without the complication of their disappointing younger daughter. I heard about these dinners secondhand, through my mother's passing comments about how charming Ryan was, how well he fit into the family, how impressed he was with Bethany's accomplishments. It was fine with me. I had my own life, my own work, my own world that didn't include performance dinners and false smiles. But then, 3 weeks ago, my mother called with a different tone in her voice. They were planning a special dinner at an upscale restaurant, she said, and I needed to be there. Not wanted, needed. I asked why, and she hesitated before saying, "It's important for Bethany. Ryan wants to meet the whole family." The warning came 3 days before the dinner. My mother called again, her voice tight with anxiety, and said, "Marlene, I need you to understand how important this dinner is. Ryan comes from a very prominent family. They have connections everywhere. This is a huge opportunity for Bethany, for all of us. Please try to look presentable. Wear something nice. Maybe borrow something from a friend if you don't have anything appropriate. The implication was clear. I was a liability, a potential embarrassment, someone who needed managing. The next day, my father sent a text message that was even more direct. This is important for Bethany. Don't ruin it with your situation. My situation. That's what he called my life, my choices, my existence. A situation to be managed, hidden, minimized. I almost didn't go. I stood in my closet the night before the dinner, looking at my limited wardrobe, feeling the familiar weight of inadequacy pressing down on my shoulders. Everything I owned was practical, modest, bought on sale or second-hand. Nothing screamed success or sophistication. Nothing would make my parents proud or impress Bethany's wealthy boyfriend. I could call and say I was sick, couldn't make it, had a work emergency. They'd be relieved, honestly. One less thing to worry about. But something stubborn in me refused to hide. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion from years of being erased. Maybe it was just curiosity about this Ryan person, who had everyone so captivated. I chose my least worn dress, simple and black, paired it with the only nice shoes I owned, and told myself it was just one dinner. I could survive one dinner. Walking into the restaurant felt like entering enemy territory. The place was all marble and crystal, the kind of establishment where the prix-fixe menu cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My parents were already there, seated in a private dining room with Bethany and a tall, handsome man I assumed was Ryan. My mother's eyes swept over me the moment I entered, taking inventory, finding me wanting. She didn't say anything, but her slight frown and tiny headshake communicated everything. My father barely acknowledged my arrival, offering a curt nod before turning his attention back to Ryan, who was in the middle of a story about sailing. Bethany's greeting was even colder. "Oh, you actually came," said with surprise, and something that sounded like disappointment. She was dressed impeccably in designer everything, her hair and makeup perfect, every inch of her screaming success and sophistication. Next to her, I felt like exactly what I was. The poor relation, the charity case, the family member they'd rather hide. Ryan stood when I approached the table, which caught me off guard. He extended his hand, smile warm, and introduced himself properly. There was something calculating in his eyes, an intelligence that seemed to be taking in everything about me, about the family dynamics, about the way my parents stiffened when I sat down. He asked me polite questions about my drive here, whether I'd been to this restaurant before, casual small talk that my family didn't even attempt. My mother ordered champagne, expensive bottles that I knew I couldn't afford if I had to pay my share. And the dinner began with toasts to Bethany and Ryan, to their relationship, to bright futures. I sipped my champagne and tried to become invisible, a skill I'd perfected over 3 decades of family gatherings. Before the appetizers arrived, my father pulled me aside on the pretense of showing me something in the hallway. Once we were out of earshot, he gripped my arm and looked at me with an intensity I rarely saw. "Please," he said, and for a moment, I thought he might actually be about to apologize for something, acknowledge the years of inequality. Instead, he said, "Please, for once in your life, don't embarrass us. This man is important, his family is important, Bethany's future depends on making a good impression. Just keep quiet, smile, don't draw attention to yourself. Can you do that?" I pulled my arm free and walked back to the table without answering. I could do that. I'd been doing that my entire life. Dinner started with champagne I couldn't afford, and conversation that revolved entirely around Bethany's recent promotion to senior associate at her marketing firm. My parents acted like she'd been elected president, the way they told and retold the story of how her boss had called her into his office and offered her the position with a significant raise. Ryan asked thoughtful questions about her responsibilities, her team, her vision for the department, and Bethany glowed under the attention, becoming more animated with every question. She talked about accounts and campaigns and strategies, using corporate jargon that meant nothing to me but impressed my parents endlessly. My father kept saying, "That's my girl," and my mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, like this was the proudest moment of her life. I pushed food around my plate and tried to calculate how much this meal was costing. The appetizers alone were probably $50 each, delicate arrangements of seafood and microgreens that disappeared in 3 bites. The wine my father ordered cost more than my monthly electric bill. I felt suffocated by the excess, by the performance, by the desperate need everyone at this table had to prove something to Ryan. He seemed nice enough, polite and attentive, but there was something studied about the way he engaged with each person, like he was conducting research. He laughed at my father's jokes, complimented my mother's jewelry, asked Bethany questions that let her showcase her knowledge. He was either genuinely interested or exceptionally skilled at pretending, and I couldn't tell which. The stories about Bethany's childhood came next, the same ones I'd heard a million times, polished and perfected through repetition. How Shed learned to read at age 3, how Shed won every spelling bee and science fair, how teachers had always said she was gifted, special, destined for greatness. My parents told these stories with such conviction that I almost wondered if I'd imagined my own childhood, my own accomplishments, my own existence. In their version of family history, there was only Bethany, singular and shining, with everyone else as supporting cast. Ryan listened attentively, nodding and smiling, occasionally glancing my way as if wondering where I fit into this narrative. I didn't. That was the point. When the main courses arrived, elaborate presentations of meat and vegetables arranged like art, Ryan turned his attention to me for the first time since Wed sat down. The table had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, my parents and Bethany trading stories and laughs, everyone relaxed by wine and good food. I was cutting into my chicken, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible, when Ryan's voice cut through the ambient conversation. "And what about you, Marlene? What do you do?" The question was simple, friendly, genuinely curious. The reaction was instant and visceral. My mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth, fork suspended in air. My father's face went tight, and he shot me a look that was equal parts warning and pleading. Bethany's smirk appeared immediately, sharp and satisfied, like she'd been waiting for this moment. And my mother, recovering first, leaned forward slightly, and said those 3 words that defined my entire existence in this family: "Don't embarrass us." She said it quietly but with absolute conviction, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. Don't tell the truth. Don't be yourself. Don't exist in any way that might reflect poorly on us. My father jumped in before I could respond, his voice overly jovial, obviously deflecting. "Marlene is between opportunities right now," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "You know how it is, figuring things out, exploring options. Between opportunities, like I was unemployed, directionless, a burden." Bethany couldn't resist adding her contribution, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That's a nice way of saying unemployed. Poor Marlene's been struggling to find her path for years now." She took a delicate sip of wine and smiled at Ryan like they were sharing a private joke about me. The humiliation burned through me, hot and familiar, the same feeling I'd carried since childhood. Invisible until I was inconvenient, then suddenly, the center of negative attention. Ryan looked confused by the family's reaction, his brow furrowing slightly. He glanced around the table, taking in my mother's tight smile, my father's nervous energy, Bethany's satisfied smugness, and my own carefully blank expression. "I'm sorry," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "I didn't mean to ask something inappropriate. I'm just curious about what field you're in, what you're passionate about, that's all." His tone was so reasonable, so normal, that it highlighted how absolutely insane my family's response was. He was asking a basic getting-to-know-you question, and they were acting like I'd been asked to confess to a crime. My mother tried to redirect, her voice bright and artificial. "Ryan, didn't you say you just got back from Cabo? Bethany was telling us about the resort. It sounded absolutely divine." But Ryan wasn't biting. He kept his attention on me, waiting for an answer, and I could see him reassessing the family dynamics, piecing together the strange tension. My father signaled the waiter for more wine, his discomfort obvious. Bethany jumped in again, unable to resist another opportunity to diminish me. "Marlene works at a nonprofit. Very humble work. Very noble, I suppose, though not exactly what you'd call successful." The way she said humble made it sound like a character flaw. My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Not everyone can be ambitious like Bethany. Some people are satisfied with simpler paths. It's fine, really. We're proud she's found something she enjoys, even if it's not particularly impressive." They were talking about me like I wasn't sitting right there, rewriting my life into a story that fit their narrative. The nonprofit work was real, but the way they framed it, the dismissiveness, the barely concealed embarrassment, none of that acknowledged what I actually did, or why it mattered. To them, anything that wasn't corporate success, status, money was failure by default. Ryan leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued rather than deterred. "Working at a nonprofit sounds meaningful. What kind of work specifically? What's your focus?" He asked follow-up questions like he actually wanted to know, like my answer mattered. I could feel my family's collective anxiety rising. This wasn't going how they'd planned. They wanted me to mumble something vague and retreat back into silence. They wanted Ryan to lose interest and return his attention to Bethany where it belonged. Instead, he was looking at me with genuine curiosity, waiting for me to speak, and I was about to decide whether to play their game one more time or finally tell the truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, insistent, and I felt the weight of the message waiting there. Everything was about to change. I pulled my phone from my pocket, intending to silence it, but the notification on the screen stopped me cold. It was from my colleague, the assistant director at the shelter, and the message was simple but profound. It's official. Board voted unanimously. Congratulations, director. My hands started shaking slightly as I processed what this meant, what I'd been working toward for years finally coming to fruition. I set the phone face down on the table, but the message had already shifted something inside me, given me a jolt of clarity about who I was versus who my family believed me to be. They had no idea, they'd never asked, never cared to know, and in that moment, with Ryan still waiting for my answer, and my family silently begging me to minimize myself, I had to decide whether to keep protecting their illusions or speak my truth. The story they didn't know started 8 years ago, right after I finished my associate degree at community college. I'd been working at the diner, saving money, trying to figure out what came next. A coworker mentioned that the local women's shelter was looking for volunteers, someone to help with administrative work and childcare a few hours a week. I went mostly because I needed something on my resume, something that looked better than waitress. But within a week, I knew I'd found something that mattered. The women there, the survivors, they saw me in a way my family never had. They valued kindness and reliability over status and money. They needed help that I could actually provide. For the first time in my life, I felt useful, necessary, seen. I started as a volunteer, working 10 hours a week while still waitressing full-time. Within 6 months, they offered me a paid position as volunteer coordinator. It didn't pay much, barely more than I was making in tips, but it came with purpose. I was helping organize donation drives, recruit new volunteers, create systems that made the shelter run more smoothly. I discovered I was good at it, good at seeing what people needed, and figuring out how to provide it. The women who came through our doors were dealing with trauma I could barely comprehend, and yet they were the strongest people I'd ever met. They were rebuilding their lives from nothing, protecting their children, refusing to give up. They inspired me in ways my family's pursuit of status and wealth never had. Within 2 years, I was promoted to program manager, overseeing all the shelter's services from legal advocacy to job training to childcare. That's when I realized I needed more education, formal training in trauma-informed care and social work. So I applied to graduate programs, taking the GRE on my lunch break, writing application essays late at night after 12-hour shifts. I got into Columbia's online Master of Social Work program, full-time course load while working full-time hours. My parents never knew I was even applying. I never told them when I got accepted. I paid for it entirely with scholarships, grants, and additional student loans, working myself to exhaustion for 3 years to get through it. When I graduated with my MSW, I celebrated alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and a sense of accomplishment my family would never understand. My thesis research focused on trauma-informed care models for domestic violence survivors, specifically looking at how shelters could better address the complex needs of women leaving abusive situations. I published parts of it in peer-reviewed journals, presented findings at regional conferences, started getting noticed by people in the field. Larger organizations reached out asking about our model, wanting to replicate our success. Our shelter had some of the best outcomes in the state. Women who came through our program were less likely to return to abusive situations, more likely to achieve economic independence, more likely to report improved mental health. We didn't just provide beds and food. We provided comprehensive support that addressed root causes and long-term stability. And I'd built most of those programs from scratch. The director position I'd just been offered was the culmination of years of work. I'd been acting director for 6 months while the board searched for a permanent replacement for our retiring director. They'd interviewed external candidates, people with more years of experience and fancier degrees from in-person programs. But in the end, they chose me. They chose the woman who'd started as a volunteer, who knew every corner of the shelter because she'd cleaned toilets and painted walls and sat with crying children at 3 in the morning. They chose the person who understood the work not as a career but as a calling. The message on my phone was them telling me that everything I'd sacrificed, every night of studying while exhausted, Every moment of choosing my clients over my own comfort had been worth it. The reason I'd never told my family about any of this was painfully simple. They'd never asked. Not once in 8 years had my mother or father inquired about my work with genuine interest. They'd never asked to visit the shelter, never asked about the women I served, never acknowledged my graduate degree because I never mentioned it and they never noticed. The one time I'd tried to tell them about getting my MSW, my mother had interrupted halfway through my sentence to tell me about Bethany's promotion to junior associate at her firm. The message was clear. My accomplishments didn't matter, weren't worth attention, weren't impressive enough to warrant their time. So I stopped trying. I built a whole life, a whole career, a whole identity separate from them. They thought I answered phones and ran donation drives. I let them think that. It was easier than fighting to be seen. But Ryan's question, combined with the message on my phone, combined with 32 years of being invisible, made me reconsider my silence. I looked up from the phone to find my entire family staring at me. My mother's eyes were pleading, silently begging me not to say anything that would embarrass them in front of Ryan. My father had that resigned look, like he was already cringing at whatever I might say. Bethany wore her smugness like armor, confident that I had nothing worth sharing. And Ryan, the only person at the table who wasn't my blood relation, was the only one looking at me like I was a person rather than a problem. His genuine interest, so foreign in the context of my family, made me realize I was tired. Tired of being small. Tired of protecting their feelings while sacrificing my own dignity. Tired of the lie. So I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my mouth to answer Ryan's question, to finally say something true about my work, but Bethany couldn't help herself. She cut me off before I could form a complete sentence, her voice bright with false enthusiasm masking genuine condescension. She works at some woman's shelter. It's very noble, like I said. Very noble, but, not exactly what you'd call successful. I mean, there's no real advancement opportunities, no prestige, nothing you'd put on a resume that would impress anyone. But Marlene's always been more about doing good than doing well, haven't you? She smiled at me like she'd just complimented me, like reducing my life's work to charity work done by someone without ambition was somehow kind. My mother jumped in, nodding vigorously in agreement. We're very proud that she helps people, of course. It's admirable in its way. But it's not a real career, not like what Bethany has built. There's no growth potential, no financial security, no professional development. It's more like extended volunteering, really. She barely makes ends meet. Every word was a paper cut. Small individually but cumulatively devastating. She was rewriting reality, making my life sound like a cautionary tale, rather than a deliberately chosen path. And the worst part was, she believed what she was saying. She genuinely thought my work was meaningless because it didn't come with status or money. My father added his contribution to the diminishment, leaning back in his chair with the air of someone delivering unfortunate news. We've offered to help her find a real job many times. I have connections. I could get her into an entry-level position at a decent company. Nothing as impressive as Bethany's role, obviously, but something with benefits, with a future. But she's stubborn, won't accept help, would rather struggle in poverty working at this little shelter than accept that maybe there are better options available. His version of events was so twisted it was almost funny. The help he referenced was his friend's offer to hire me as a secretary, answering phones and filing paperwork for barely above minimum wage. It declined because I already had a professional career, but in his telling, I was the stubborn one refusing opportunities. Each statement they made was technically rooted in some fact but framed in a way that distorted reality beyond recognition. Yes, I worked at a shelter. Yes, I lived modestly. Yes, I took public transportation, but the reasons behind those choices, the context that made them purposeful, rather than pathetic, they either didn't know or didn't care to acknowledge. Bethany continued her assault. She still lives in that tiny apartment in the bad part of town. 1 bedroom, I think? Or maybe a studio? I've never actually been there. No car, so she takes buses everywhere, which is fine, I guess. Very environmental, but also kind of sad at her age. Most people have their lives together by 32, you know. The cruelty was casual, delivered with a smile and a light tone that made it seem like friendly ribbing rather than systematic humiliation. But I could see what they were doing. They were painting a picture for Ryan of a woman who'd failed to launch, who was stuck in extended adolescence, who worked at a charity because she couldn't handle the real world. They were making sure he knew I was the family embarrassment, the cautionary tale, the one who'd taken the wrong path. And they were doing it right in front of me, talking about me like I was an object rather than a person, reducing my entire existence to a punchline that made them look generous for even including me in family gatherings. But Ryan wasn't responding the way they expected. Instead of politely changing the subject or expressing the pity they clearly anticipated, he leaned forward with increasing interest. "Working with domestic violence survivors must be incredibly challenging," he said, his voice serious and engaged. "What kind of programs does your shelter run? I imagine the needs are pretty complex, requiring coordinated services across multiple areas like legal support, counseling, economic empowerment. That sounds like sophisticated work requiring real expertise." He was asking substantive questions, treating my work like it was legitimate and important, and I could see my family's growing discomfort as the conversation refused to go where they wanted it to go. I hesitated, feeling the weight of 3 decades of silence pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to retreat into familiar patterns, to mumble something vague and let them change the subject, to protect their comfortable narrative about who I was. But Ryan's genuine interest, combined with my family's blatant disrespect, created a friction that sparked something like courage. I was about to speak when my mother interrupted, desperate to redirect. "Oh, it's very small scale. Nothing like what you're probably imagining, Ryan. Just a little local thing. Nothing like Bethany's work, which impacts major corporations and national campaigns. Marlene's shelter is just a few beds and some donated clothing. Sweet, but not substantial." Bethany sensed my hesitation and went for another cut, this one designed to completely destroy any credibility I might try to claim. "She basically runs donation drives and answers phones. That's most of what she does. Someone has to staff the front desk and sort through used clothes people donate, and Marlene's good at that kind of thing. Simple tasks, you know? Not everyone needs to have a challenging career. Some people are content with simplicity." She delivered this character assassination with a pitying smile, and I watched my father nod in agreement, both of them collaborating in the erasure of my actual professional identity. Then Bethany brought up ancient history, something designed to further diminish me in Ryan's eyes, and remind everyone at the table why I'd never measured up. "Remember when she dated that mechanic? God, when was that? 5 years ago? We were so embarrassed. She brought him to Christmas dinner, and he showed up in jeans with grease under his fingernails. Nice enough guy, I guess, but so inappropriate for a family gathering. We were mortified. My mother actually shuddered at the memory, like the existence of a working-class man at her dinner table was traumatic. They were conveniently forgetting that Marcus had been kind, intelligent, loved me genuinely, wore clean clothes to every family event, and tried so hard to connect with them despite their obvious disdain. "At least you came to your senses and ended that," my father added. Like I'd made some mature decision to upgrade rather than the truth, which was that I'd loved Marcus deeply, and had left me, because he couldn't stand watching my family treat me like garbage. Head told me I deserved better, that no relationship was worth the emotional abuse I endured every time we visited my family. His leaving had been an act of love, forcing me to see what I'd normalized, but my family remembered it as me finally making a good choice, getting rid of dead weight, aiming higher. They had no idea they'd been the problem, that their cruelty had destroyed something good in my life, and they were using it now as evidence of my poor judgment, my tendency toward inadequacy. Each comment built on the last, creating a mountain of dismissal and contempt that I'd somehow survived for 3 decades. Ryan was looking increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between me and my family like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. He tried once more to bring the conversation back to something substantive. "Marlene, I'd really like to hear about your work directly from you. It sounds like there's more to it than everyone's describing." His kindness was genuine but also strategic somehow, like he was testing something, confirming a hypothesis. My mother, sensing she was losing control of the narrative, made one last attempt to shut down the conversation entirely. "Ryan, sweetheart, tell us more about your new investment portfolio. Bethany mentioned you're diversifying into tech stocks. That sounds so impressive and complicated. We'd love to hear your expertise." She was pulling out every manipulation tactic, flattering him, redirecting attention, trying desperately to move past the uncomfortable topic of me. But something had shifted in the room's energy. Ryan was no longer playing along with their game. He was watching me with an intensity that made me wonder what he actually knew, what had already figured out, what this whole dinner was really about. And my phone was burning a hole in my pocket with its message about the director position, proof that everything my family believed about me was a carefully constructed lie they'd told themselves to justify their treatment of me. I set my fork down carefully, the decision made somewhere deep in my bones. I was done being small, done protecting their delusions, done sacrificing my dignity for their comfort. I looked directly at Ryan, ignoring my mother's warning glare, and Bethany's condescending smile, and my father's resigned sigh. "I'd be happy to tell you about my work," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The table went quiet, tension thick enough to cut, everyone waiting to see what I'd say, how I'd embarrass them this time. "I'm the program director at Riverside Women's Advocacy Center," I began, using my real title for the first time in front of my family. "We're a comprehensive domestic violence intervention program that serves survivors and their children throughout the state. We provide emergency shelter, legal advocacy, mental health counseling, economic empowerment programs, and childcare services. At capacity, we house 40 women and children at a time, though we serve hundreds more through our outreach programs." Ryan leaned forward, nodding, encouraging me to continue. I could see my family exchanging confused looks, like I was making things up or exaggerating, but I kept talking. "The shelter operates on a trauma-informed care model that I developed during my graduate work. We don't just provide beds and food, we address the complex, intersecting needs that survivors face when leaving abusive situations. That means coordinating services across multiple systems like legal aid, healthcare, education, and employment. We help women file protective orders, access emergency medical care, enroll children in new schools, find jobs, secure housing. We run support groups, parenting classes, financial literacy workshops. Our programs are designed to address not just immediate safety, but long-term stability and healing." The words flowed easily because I knew this work intimately, lived it every day, could talk about it for hours without notes. Ryan asked specific questions that revealed he actually understood the complexity of what I was describing. "How do you handle the coordination across systems? That seems like it would require strong relationships with courts, police, hospitals, social services." I explained our memorandums of understanding with local agencies, our staff positions dedicated to system navigation, our partnerships with pro bono legal clinics and mental health providers. I told him about our advocate model, where each woman is assigned a dedicated staff member who helps coordinate all her needs rather than bouncing between different offices and agencies. I described our housing program that helps women transition from emergency shelter to stable housing, including financial assistance and landlord partnerships. My mother tried to interrupt, her voice sharp with anxiety. "That's lovely, dear, but I'm sure Ryan doesn't need all the details." But Ryan held up his hand politely, not breaking eye contact with me. "Actually, I'm very interested in the details. Please continue, Marlene." So I did. I told him about the innovative aspects of our model that had gained national attention. The peer support program where women who'd successfully left their situations returned as mentors. The children's services that addressed the specific trauma kids experienced witnessing violence. The employment partnership program with local businesses that created job opportunities specifically for survivors. The research component where we tracked outcomes and published findings to improve the field's understanding of what works. The details I shared next were things my family had literally never known, because they'd never asked, never cared, never seen me as someone capable of professional achievement. I published my research on trauma-informed shelter models in 3 peer-reviewed journals over the past 4 years. The model we implemented at Riverside became the basis for a training curriculum that's now used in shelters across 15 states. I've been invited to speak at conferences at Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago, though I've declined most of those invitations because I prefer to focus on direct service rather than academic visibility. Ryan's eyebrows raised with recognition, like pieces were clicking into place, but my family looked completely bewildered. I continued, momentum building, years of silence breaking open. Last year, our grant applications brought in $3.2 million in funding from federal sources, private foundations, and individual donors. That funding allowed us to expand services, hire additional staff, and launch our statewide prevention education program. We're now contracted by the Department of Justice to provide technical assistance to shelters in rural areas that lack resources and infrastructure. We've helped 23 shelters across the state improve their services and outcomes. Each fact I shared was verifiable, documented, real. But watching my family's faces, I could see they didn't believe me. They thought I was embellishing, exaggerating, making things up. Bethany actually laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please. If any of that were true, we would have heard about it. You expect us to believe you're some kind of national expert? You, who barely finished community college? You, who lives in a studio apartment? Come on, Marlene. There's no need to make things up just because you're embarrassed about your actual life. Her conviction that I was lying was so absolute that it might have been funny if it weren't so sad. My father chimed in, uncomfortable but firm. Marlene, there's really no need to embellish your work. We're not judging you for having a simple job. It's fine. You don't need to impress anyone. My mother looked genuinely mortified, convinced I was humiliating myself and by extension them. Sweetheart, I think we should change the subject. You're making yourself look rather foolish with these exaggerations. She turned to Ryan with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry. She gets a bit sensitive sometimes about her career choices. I think she feels defensive when she's around Bethany, who's been so successful. It's natural for siblings to compete, but making up achievements is going a bit far. She was actually apologizing to Ryan for my supposed lies, completely unable to conceive that I might be telling the truth, that I might actually be accomplished in my own right. Bethany pulled out her phone, a smug smile on her face. Let me just Google this award you supposedly won, this governor's something or other. I'm sure that's public record, right? If it exists. She was so confident I was lying that she was willing to fact-check me right there at the table, expecting to catch me in embarrassment. But before she could search, Ryan pulled out his own phone, his expression having shifted from curious to something more complicated, something that looked almost like recognition or confirmation. He looked at his screen, then up at me, then back down, his face going still in a way that made everyone at the table stop talking. Excuse me, Ryan said, standing abruptly. I need to take this call. His phone hadn't actually rung, but he walked away from the table quickly, leaving the five of us in tense silence. The moment he was out of earshot, my family turned on me, with unified fury. Bethany hissed across the table. How dare you lie like that in front of Ryan? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Making up awards and publications like some kind of pathological liar? What is wrong with you? My mother's voice was low and angry. Making up accomplishments that anyone can fact-check is beyond foolish, Marlene. When Ryan finds out you've been lying, how do you think that reflects on this family? On Bethany. My father just stared at me with disappointment so profound it would have hurt if I still cared what he thought. This is exactly why we didn't want you here. You always have to make everything about you. Why can't you just let Bethany have her moment? Why do you have to create drama with your insecurities? Everything I said was true, every word verifiable, but they'd rather believe I was a liar than accept that they'd been wrong about me for 32 years. The cognitive dissonance was too great. Their entire understanding of family dynamics, of who was valuable and who wasn't, depended on me being the failure. If I wasn't actually a failure, what did that make them? Ryan returned to the table after 10 minutes that felt like an hour. His entire demeanor had changed. The polite, charming dinner guest was gone, replaced by someone more serious, more purposeful. He sat down and looked around the table slowly, his gaze lingering on Bethany, then my parents, before landing on me with something that looked like confirmation. I need to tell you all something, he said, his voice calm but authoritative in a way that made everyone stop mid-protest and pay attention. The air in the private dining room shifted, anticipation and confusion mixing into something electric. I'm not just in finance, he began. And I watched Bethany's face register confusion, then concern. My family name is Caldwell. The Caldwell Foundation. We're one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country, focusing specifically on social services, healthcare access, and support for vulnerable populations. I personally oversee our domestic violence prevention and intervention initiative, managing a portfolio of grants to shelters and advocacy organizations across 48 states. He let that information sink in, watching as understanding slowly dawned on each face at the table. This wasn't just some wealthy boyfriend. This was someone with significant power in the nonprofit world. Someone whose opinion and funding could make or break organizations. He turned to look at me directly. Marlene, I know exactly who you are. I've known since before tonight. Your work has been on our foundation's radar for 3 years. Your shelter's outcomes are the best we've seen nationally. 87% of the women who complete your program achieve housing stability within 6 months. 92% report no return to abusive situations after 2 years. Those numbers are extraordinary. The national averages are nowhere close. He was citing statistics I knew by heart, numbers I'd tracked meticulously, evidence of the model's effectiveness, but hearing them come from his mouth in front of my family was surreal. We've been using your trauma-informed care model to restructure programs across our entire network, Ryan continued, pulling up something on his phone. Your published research on coordinated services and the importance of advocate continuity has fundamentally changed how we think about intervention design. I've personally used your work to train staff at over 50 shelters. 3 years ago, you were invited to consult with our foundation. You declined. 2 years ago, we invited you to speak at our annual conference. You declined. Last year, we tried to set up a meeting to discuss partnership opportunities. Your director said you don't take meetings about career advancement because you're committed to direct service. He looked at me with something like respect mixed with curiosity, like he was trying to understand why someone would turn down those opportunities. I read your master's thesis, he said, which shocked me, because it wasn't exactly light reading. The section on how trauma affects decision-making and why traditional shelter models often re-traumatize survivors by removing their autonomy was brilliant. You proposed a completely different approach that puts power back in survivors' hands, while still maintaining safety protocols. It was innovative and rigorously researched, and you actually implemented it. That's rare. Most academics theorize. You built a working model and proved it works. The compliments felt foreign, uncomfortable, because I'd spent so long working in obscurity, deliberately avoiding recognition. But hearing my work described this way in front of my family was creating a cognitive dissonance they couldn't process. Ryan turned to Bethany, his expression cooling noticeably. When you mentioned you had a sister named Marlene who worked at a nonprofit, I wondered if you might be related to Marlene Hayes of Riverside. When you said your sister's name was Marlene Hayes, and she worked at a women's shelter, I knew it had to be you. I asked you to tell me more about her work, and you said. He paused, pulling up something on his phone, apparently notes from a previous conversation. You said, and I'm quoting, she's basically a secretary at some tiny shelter, answers phones, takes donations, very sweet but not ambitious. I thought maybe you didn't know what your sister actually did, that maybe she didn't share her professional life with family. Bethany's face had gone pale, then flushed red. What are you talking about? She works at a shelter. That's what I said. A woman's shelter. But her voice lacked conviction now, uncertainty creeping in. Ryan shook his head. She's one of the leading experts in domestic violence intervention in the country. She's developed programs that are being replicated nationally. She's published groundbreaking research. She's turned down offers from larger organizations multiple times because she's committed to the community she serves. And you described her as a secretary. The judgment in his voice was unmistakable now, disgust barely concealed. He turned to my parents. When I suggested meeting Marlene, Bethany said you'd be embarrassed to have her at dinner, that she wasn't the kind of family member you like to show off. She said bringing her would be awkward because she hadn't done anything with her life. So I pushed for this dinner specifically because I wanted to see if that was true, if someone as accomplished as Marlene Hayes could really come from a family that was embarrassed by her. I wanted to understand the disconnect. His words hung in the air like an accusation, and my mother's face had gone from pale to gray. Ryan pulled up articles on his phone, turning the screen to show my parents. This is from the Washington Post, 2 years ago. A feature on innovative approaches to domestic violence intervention. Marlene is quoted extensively. They called her a quiet revolutionary in a field desperate for change. This is from NPR, a story about trauma-informed care models. They profiled Riverside as the gold standard. This is the Governor's Award for Excellence in Community Service that Marlene received 18 months ago. There's a photo of her shaking hands with the governor. This is her partnership with the Department of Justice, a federal contract to provide training and technical assistance. This is her Columbia University degree, Master of Social Work, graduated with honors. This is... Stop, my mother said, her voice cracking. She was staring at the phone like it was showing her images of alien life. That can't be right. There must be some mistake. That's not. Marlene would have told us if she'd won awards or published research or worked with the governor. She would have mentioned it. But even as she said it, doubt flickered across her face, because deep down, she knew. She knew they'd never asked, never cared, never created space for me to share anything about my life. They'd been so busy celebrating Bethany that they'd never noticed I'd built an entire professional identity they knew nothing about. My father pulled out his own phone, searching, his hands shaking slightly. I watched him find article after article, award after award. everything Ryan had mentioned and more. The evidence was irrefutable, documented, public record. I wasn't lying or exaggerating. I was exactly who I said I was, and they'd missed it completely, because they'd never looked. Bethany sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock and something that looked like betrayal, though I couldn't understand what she thought I'd betrayed. Ryan looked at all of them with barely concealed contempt. She's your daughter, your sister. How do you not know any of this? How have you gone years without asking what she actually does, what she's accomplished, who she is? Nobody had an answer for that. The silence stretched, broken only by my father's frantic scrolling, finding more and more evidence that I was telling the truth. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice desperate, trying to rewrite history in real time. Well, of course we knew about her work. We're so proud of her. We just don't like to brag about our daughter's accomplishments. It's tacky to boast. We've always supported Marlene in her career choice, even though it's so different from what Bethany does. Different paths, both valuable. She was lying, transparently, trying to save face in front of Ryan, but the words rang hollow even to her own ears. My father tried to recover too, his voice overly hearty. We just don't broadcast everything. Marlene prefers to work quietly, behind the scenes. We respect that. But yes, we've always known she was doing important work. Very proud. Very proud indeed. They were scrambling, rewriting decades of dismissal and contempt into supportive parenting, but the performance was too late and too obvious. Ryan wasn't buying it for a second, and more importantly, neither was I. I'd spent 32 years believing their assessment of me, internalizing their disappointment, accepting that I was the family failure, but sitting there watching them lie and scramble, I realized the failure had never been mine. It had always been theirs. They'd failed to see me, failed to know me, failed to be the family I deserved. The dinner had completely derailed, the carefully orchestrated evening my parents had planned turning into a disaster of their own making. My mother kept glancing at Ryan with desperate, pleading looks, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. My father had set his phone down and was staring at his plate like answers might be hidden in the remains of his meal. Bethany was the only one still trying to maintain some semblance of control, though her voice had lost its confident edge. Ryan, I think there's been some confusion. Obviously, Marlene does good work, but the way she described it tonight was exaggerated. I'm sure of it, but Ryan wasn't interested in debating reality anymore. He turned back to me, his expression businesslike now. Marlene, the reason I actually wanted to meet you tonight, beyond confirming that you are who I thought you were, is because our foundation is launching a major new initiative. We're creating a national coalition for domestic violence survivors, a coordinating body that will work across all 50 states to improve standards, share best practices, provide training, and coordinate advocacy efforts at the federal level. It's a massive undertaking with significant funding behind it. We need someone to direct it, someone who understands both the practical realities of running shelters and the policy implications of national coordination. He paused, and I could feel everyone at the table holding their breath. You were our first choice for the position. Our board voted unanimously 3 months ago to offer you the role. We've been trying to reach you through official channels, but your shelter director said you automatically decline any meeting requests about career opportunities. She said you've turned down 6 different job offers in the past 2 years, because you're committed to staying where you are, to the women you serve directly. So I thought maybe if I approached it differently, in a more casual context, you might at least hear me out. The explanation made sense of everything that had felt off about this dinner, the way Head maneuvered to meet me, the specific questions Head asked. My mother's recovery was almost instantaneous, her survival instincts kicking in. Marlene, this is wonderful. This is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been hoping you'd get. We should discuss this as a family, of course. These are big decisions that require careful consideration. She was already inserting herself into my life, trying to take ownership of a moment she'd done nothing to create. My father jumped in, his voice authoritative in that way, that used to make me feel small but now just sounded hollow. Well, need to review the offer carefully, negotiate terms, make sure they're offering appropriate compensation and benefits. We know people in the nonprofit world can make some calls to verify this is legitimate. They were treating me like a child, incapable of making adult decisions, already positioning themselves as the wise parents guiding their naive daughter. The fact that I'd been managing complex programs and million-dollar budgets for years didn't register because it never had. In their minds, I would always be the incompetent one who needed their guidance. even when that guidance was based on complete ignorance of my actual life and capabilities. My mother continued, turning to Ryan with a smile that was meant to be charming but looked desperate. We always knew Marlene had potential. We encouraged her to pursue nonprofit work because we saw she had a gift for helping people. This is exactly what we hoped would come from that encouragement. Bethany had been silent, processing, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When she finally spoke, her voice was shrill with emotion she couldn't contain. "This is my dinner. This whole evening was supposed to be about me, about us." She gestured between herself and Ryan, her hand shaking slightly. "You asked me out. You pursued me. We've been dating for 6 months. 6 months! And now you're telling me it was all just a way to get to my sister? Is that what this has been? Am I just some pathway to Marlene?" Ryan had the grace to look uncomfortable, but he didn't lie. "Bethany, when I first reached out to you on the dating app, yes, I recognized your last name and I thought you might be related to Marlene Hayes. I thought maybe you could introduce us, that we might connect through family channels. But when we went on our first date and I asked about your family, you spoke about Marlene with such contempt that I thought I must have been wrong. I thought surely if you were related to someone as accomplished as Marlene Hayes, you'd mention her achievements. Instead, you talked about how embarrassing it was to have a sister who worked at a shelter, how your parents wished she'd done something more respectable with her life." He continued, and I could see him choosing his words carefully, trying to be honest without being cruel. "I kept dating you because I thought I must have made a mistake, that you couldn't possibly be related to the Marlene Hayes I knew from her work. Your description of your family didn't match what I knew about her. But then you mentioned her full name, where she worked, and I knew for certain. I suggested this dinner hoping to finally meet her, to confirm what I suspected, which is that your family has absolutely no idea who she actually is or what she's accomplished." Tonight confirmed everything. The way he said it wasn't apologetic. He wasn't sorry for using Bethany as a means to an end. He was simply stating facts. Bethany's face crumpled, tears starting to fall, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. She'd been used, yes, but Shed also spent years using me as a punching bag to make herself feel superior. "You're disgusting," she said to Ryan, her voice breaking. "You led me on. You made me think you cared about me. We slept together. I introduced you to my parents. I was falling in love with you. And it was all fake." Ryan shrugged, not unkindly but not particularly gentle either. "I never told you I loved you. I was clear from the beginning that I was taking things slow, getting to know you. You assumed more than I ever promised. And honestly, the way you talked about your sister, about service work, about anyone who wasn't wealthy or successful by your definition, I couldn't have loved someone with those values." My parents were watching their perfect plan collapse in real time. The wealthy boyfriend they'd been counting on, the social capital they'd been building, the future son-in-law they'd been bragging about, all of it evaporating because Ryan had never wanted Bethany at all. My mother tried to salvage something. Anything. "Ryan, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Bethany loves her sister. We all love Marlene. Family is complicated, you know. Sometimes we say things we don't mean out of sibling rivalry or stress. But underneath it all, we're very proud of what Marlene has accomplished, even if we don't always express it well." But Ryan had heard enough platitudes. "With respect, Mrs. Hayes, I've spent the last 6 months listening to Bethany describe Marlene as a failure, as an embarrassment, as someone who couldn't hack it in the real world. I've heard you echo those sentiments in our conversations. You told me that Marlene was a disappointment who'd wasted her potential on charity work. You said you wished she'd done something to make the family proud. Those weren't misunderstandings or poor word choices. Those were your actual beliefs about your daughter, and they're completely divorced from reality." The indictment was damning, made worse by its calm delivery and obvious truth. My phone rang then, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. I glanced at the screen and saw it was the shelter, my colleague calling, which meant emergency. "I need to take this," I said, excusing myself from the table. I stepped away to a quiet corner and answered to hear panic in my colleague's voice. One of our residents was in crisis, had received threatening calls from her abuser, who'd somehow found her location, was terrified and wanting to leave the shelter because she thought she was putting everyone in danger. I switched into professional mode immediately, asking calm questions, giving clear instructions, activating our emergency protocols. I told her to call the police for a drive-by, to move the resident to our safe room, to notify our security service. to gather the other residents and do a safety briefing. I'd be there within the hour. When I returned to the table, everyone was exactly where I'd left them, frozen in their uncomfortable tableau. I have to go, I said simply, gathering my purse. There's a situation at the shelter that requires my immediate attention. Ryan stood immediately. I'll walk you out. We can schedule a proper meeting next week to discuss the position in detail. He gave Bethany one last look. Something between pity and disappointment. I think we're done here, Bethany. I'm sorry if I hurt you, but this clearly isn't working. He didn't wait for a response, just followed me toward the exit. Behind us, I could hear Bethany starting to cry in earnest, my mother rushing to comfort her, my father's voice raised in anger. This is your fault, Marlene. You've always been jealous of your sister. You couldn't stand seeing her happy, so you had to ruin this with your lies and exaggerations. You've always been selfish, always making everything about you. His words should have hurt, probably would have destroyed me a year ago, but now they just sounded pathetic. They were still trying to make me the villain in a story where I'd been the victim for 32 years, and I was finally done playing that role. Outside the restaurant, the cool evening air hit my face like a blessing after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Ryan walked beside me toward the parking lot, his hands in his pockets, giving me space to process everything that had just happened. Finally, he spoke. I want to apologize for the deception with Bethany. Using her to get to you wasn't my finest moment. But watching how your family treats you, I understand why you're impossible to reach through normal channels. You've built walls to protect yourself from people who see you as a means to an end, and ironically, that's exactly what I did. His honesty was unexpected, and I found myself laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the empty parking lot. I almost feel sorry for her, I said, and I meant it. Bethany has no idea who she actually is beyond being the favorite, beyond being the golden child. She's built her entire identity on being better than me, on being the one who made our parents proud. If I'm not actually a failure, what does that make her? What's her identity without me as the cautionary tale? Ryan nodded thoughtfully. That's generous of you. More generous than she deserves, honestly. The way she spoke about you, about your work, about anyone who wasn't wealthy or conventionally successful, it showed a real poverty of character. You could have ended up bitter and cruel after how you were treated, but somehow, you didn't. That's remarkable. We reached my car, the 15-year-old Toyota that had embarrassed my family countless times. Ryan didn't comment on it, just leaned against the driver's side door and pulled out his phone. Let me give you the actual details of the offer, and you can think about it. No pressure, no tricks, just a straightforward professional conversation. He outlined the position. Executive Director of the National Coalition for Domestic Violence Survivors, overseeing program implementation in all 50 states, managing a budget in the tens of millions, working directly with federal agencies on policy development, salary that would finally make me financially secure for the first time in my life. It was everything a person in my field could hope for, the pinnacle of influence and impact, but I didn't answer immediately, and I could see Ryan respected that. I need to think about it, I said honestly. Not because I don't want it or don't think I could do it, but because I need to make sure I'm making this decision for the right reasons. Not to prove anything to my family, not for money or status, not to win some imagined competition with my sister, only if it's genuinely right for the work, for the women I serve, for the mission. That has to be the only reason. Ryan smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his professional demeanor. That answer is exactly why you're the right person for the job. Anyone who made this decision for ego or money wouldn't be capable of leading this coalition. Take all the time you need. I drove straight to the shelter, the dinner already feeling like something that had happened to someone else. The crisis with the resident took 3 hours to resolve. Coordinating with police for protection, arranging emergency relocation to another facility out of state, working with her children to help them understand why they had to leave suddenly, packing their belongings, ensuring the transfer happened safely. By the time I finally sat down in my office at midnight, exhausted and emotionally drained, the dinner felt like a lifetime ago. This was real. This was what mattered. Not fancy restaurants and family drama, but this work, these women, these lives I could actually impact. Over the next few days, I thought seriously about Ryan's offer. I talked to my staff, to the women at the shelter, to the board of directors. I researched the coalition structure, the scope of work, the potential for national impact. I prayed about it, meditated on it, tried to separate ego from purpose. and I realized that I could do more good with greater resources, could help thousands more women, could influence policy in ways that would ripple out across the country. So I accepted the position, not because of what happened at dinner, but in spite of it. My decision had nothing to do with my family and everything to do with the work itself. The announcement at the shelter was emotional. Women I'd worked with for years cried. Staff members I'd trained congratulated me while mourning my departure. Everyone understood this was the right move, even though it meant losing me from daily operations. I was leaving the shelter in capable hands, had spent years building a strong team precisely so the work wouldn't depend on any single person. The model would continue, the programs would thrive, and I'd still be connected to this place and these people, just from a different position. This was my real family, the people who'd seen me clearly from the beginning, who'd valued my contributions, who'd helped me become who I was meant to be. My parents called 2 days after the disastrous dinner. My mother's voice on the phone was tentative, almost pleading. Marlene, we need to talk about what happened. Your father and I have been discussing it, and we think you owe Bethany an apology. She's devastated about Ryan, and the way you flaunted your supposed accomplishments in front of him was cruel. You knew she cared about him, and you deliberately tried to steal his attention. Your selfishness ruined her relationship, and that's not acceptable. I listened without interrupting, amazed at their ability to twist reality, to make me the villain in a situation where I'd been ambushed and humiliated. My father took the phone, his voice stern and authoritative. We think it would be best if you turned down that job offer Ryan mentioned. For the sake of family harmony, for Bethany's emotional well-being, you need to let this go. You've always worked at that little shelter. Why do you suddenly need something bigger? It looks vindictive, like you're trying to show up your sister. The mature thing to do would be to decline gracefully and let things go back to normal. Can you do that for your family? The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to turn down the opportunity of a lifetime, to make myself smaller, to sacrifice my career so Bethany wouldn't feel bad about her own choices. For 3 decades, I would have considered it. I would have agonized over their request, felt guilty for causing family discord, maybe even convinced myself that staying small was somehow noble or kind. But something had broken in me that night at dinner. Or maybe something had finally healed. I didn't feel anger or hurt anymore, just a calm clarity about who they were and who I was, and the fact that those two things would never align. I'm taking the position, I said simply. I'm moving to Washington, D.C. next month to start the job. I won't be available for family dinners or holiday gatherings for the foreseeable future. I need space from all of you. My mother gasped. You can't be serious. You'd cut off your family over this? Over some job? Marlene, we're your parents. Bethany is your sister. Family is forever. You can't just walk away. But I could, and I was. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I'm not trying to punish anyone or prove anything. I'm just done. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the disappointment. I'm done sacrificing my dignity for your comfort. I hope someday you figure out what you missed, that you understand what you chose to ignore for 32 years. But I'm not waiting for that anymore. I'm not holding my breath for you to finally see me. I'm moving on. My father's voice turned cold. If you do this, if you choose this job and this separation, don't expect us to welcome you back when you realize you've made a mistake. You're choosing outsiders over your own blood. That has consequences. The threat was meant to scare me, to make me reconsider, but it just made me sad. They still thought they had power over me, that their approval or disapproval mattered enough to dictate my choices. They didn't understand that I'd already grieved the family I'd wanted, had already accepted that I'd never have parents who saw me clearly or loved me unconditionally. This wasn't a loss. This was a liberation. I hung up the phone and felt a weight I'd carried since childhood finally lift from my shoulders. No more family dinners where I was the punchline. No more holidays where I received token gifts while watching Bethany open expensive presents. No more phone calls where my accomplishments were dismissed or ignored. No more pretending that their treatment of me was normal or acceptable. I was free, and freedom felt like breathing after 32 years of holding my breath. 3 months later, I sat in my new office in Washington, D.C., sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the Capitol building. My desk held a single photo. Me with the women and staff from Riverside Shelter at my going-away party. All of us smiling, arms around each other, a family I'd chosen rather than been born into. My first major project was coordinating a national training conference for shelter directors, bringing together the best practices from across the country. My second was testifying before Congress about the need for increased federal funding for domestic violence programs. The work was harder and the stakes higher, but the impact was exponentially greater. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. I glanced at it briefly. Another message about how I was being selfish, how I was hurting the family, how I needed to come home and apologize and make things right. I deleted it without reading the full message and turned back to my work. There was a strategy meeting in an hour, a press conference tomorrow, a policy brief due by end of week. I had shelter directors calling for advice, advocates asking for guidance, survivors sharing their stories so we could better understand what they needed. I had purpose, an impact, and a life that mattered. What I didn't have anymore was shame. I looked out my window at the city spread before me, thought about the thousands of women across the country whose lives would be touched by the work we were doing. Women who had been told they weren't enough, had been diminished and dismissed and made to feel small. Women who were finding their way back to themselves despite everything they'd survived. I was one of them, really. I'd survived my family's emotional abuse, their systematic devaluation, their refusal to see me, and I'd not only survived, I'd thrived. I'd built something meaningful and important, not to prove them wrong but because it was right. Some families are born, others are chosen. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn the love of the family I was born into, conforming and shrinking, and hoping that someday they'd finally see my worth. Now I understood that some people will never see you clearly no matter how bright you shine. Not because you're insufficient, but because they lack the capacity. My family couldn't see me because they'd never really looked. They'd decided who I was before I had a chance to become myself, and no amount of achievement, or success, or worthiness would change that fundamental blindness. So I stopped trying to make them see me, and started building a life with people who already did. The lesson wasn't that success or achievement or professional recognition would finally make my family love me. The lesson was that I didn't need their love to be whole. I didn't need their approval to know my worth. I didn't need their acknowledgement to understand that my life had meaning and purpose. They'd given me the gift of their neglect by forcing me to find value in myself, to build confidence from internal rather than external sources, to measure success by impact rather than status. Without meaning to, they'd made me strong. And now that strength was carrying me forward into a future they'd never imagined for me, because they'd never bothered to imagine me at all. My closing thought as I turned back to my work was simple but profound. I'd spent 32 years seeking their approval. I'd spend the rest of my life not needing it. And that freedom, that release from the weight of their expectations and disappointment, was worth more than any award or recognition or professional achievement. I was free to be fully myself, and myself was more than enough. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you most? Have you found your own worth despite family members who couldn't see it? Drop your story in the comments below, because I know so many of you have walked similar paths, and sharing these experiences helps all of us feel less alone. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories about finding strength in impossible situations and learning that your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see it. And please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're enough exactly as they are, regardless of what their family thinks. Thank you for listening to Marlene's journey. I hope it reminds you that the opinion that matters most is your own, and that real family is defined not by blood but by who actually sees you, values you, and celebrates who you truly are. May you all find the courage to walk away from people who make you small and toward the life you deserve. Until next time, remember that you are worthy of being seen, known, and loved for exactly who you are.